Hello, everybody. I guess we are streaming online. My name is Tobias Zevi. I'm here as the the responsible of the program on global cities at ISPI, the Italian Institute of International Political Studies. And today we are going to, I'm going to lead a seminar which title is Women's Leadership in Local Communities, Next Generation EU, Cities in a Post-Pandemic Future. This seminar was hard organized after a few months. The publication of a book which is called Next Generation EU Cities, published by ISPI and Eurocities, in order to discuss about the improvement and the process of developing of the next generation EU cities at the local level. I'm going to say a few things after the introduction of President Luigi Borré, who is president of Euro Milano, partner of ISPIS in the Global Cities program. So please, Luigi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Tobias. It's a pleasure and an honor to open this workshop with such prominent international panelists. This roundtable, as Tobias said, is one of the outcomes of, in the framework of the program on global cities that is a partnership between ISPI and Euro Milano. ISPI doesn't need any presentation. It's one of the most prestigious cultural institutions in Italy with an acknowledged international fame. And this is an honor to Euro Milano to be partner of ISPI. Euro Milano is a real estate development and consulting company focused on regeneration of urban areas. The company has a strong focus on conceiving and implementing sustainable districts and buildings. So this is why we are very interested in understanding and possibly anticipating the long-run evolution of cities, the trends of evolution of cities and urban areas, and of course of local communities. So let me introduce briefly the roundtable with a few statements. As we know, more than 50% of world population and around 75% of European population lives in cities. So this is the reason why the cities are often at the front line of global crisis. So this was and it is true for COVID-19 pandemic, but for example, it is also dramatically true in the case of the tragic war in Ukraine, where death and destruction are badly hitting the cities. So cities are the first and probably the most important ground where people's problems must be faced. Therefore, as we consider how to recover the crisis effects and how to make our communities more resilient, that means in this period, in this case, practically speaking, how to spend Next-Gen EU huge amount of funds. Cities, of course, have a central role, I think. It's clear that Next-Gen EU is once in a lifetime occasion, and we cannot afford to lose or waste it. A number of issues rise. I'd like to mention just briefly a few of them. I think that one is how to balance the proximity of local institutions to people's life on one side with the necessity to better coordinate the use of next-gen resources in a wider perspective that must be at a national or even at a union level. How to let the best competencies emerge in order to more effectively use the available resources. That means also what is the role of in this process of gender balance, and then what are the real problems and the utilization of the funds. Are the organizations of the involved institutions, both private and public, in the position to face the challenge of next-gen opportunity? What is the state of the art? And again, what are the new models of cities to be pursued? I think an interesting point is the 15-minute city an effective one, or is it already superseded by other possible models? And finally, what is the role of digitalization in all the process? Many others could be the questions. So I'm looking forward to listening to our panelists and wish you a very interesting workshop. I'm sure of that. Tobia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Luigi. Thank you very much for your brief but very deep introduction. And let me introduce now our guests, starting with Anthony Paipa from the Brookings Institution. He's a senior fellow at Brookings Institutions, dealing with the issue of sustainability at the local level, but he's also, and it's a pleasure for me to present him in this way, also a senior associate fellow at ISPI. Then, of course, we have Laia Bonet-Rull, who is deputy mayor in Barcelona, and Barcelona is a key city in all the speaking we are doing today. Then we have Annalisa Boni, who is a friend, but also the co-author of the book I was discussing about before. And finally, Susanna Tomilla, cultural director at ESPO. I'm sorry, Annalisa is also commissioner in the city of Bologna, and Susanna Tomilla, who is cultural director at ISPI. So today, as we said before, as Luigi said before, we are going to discuss about on different levels. The first one is, of course, the role of cities in globalizations, in all the challenges we are facing within the framework of globalization. I'm certainly speaking about the challenge of sustainability, but also what we found out within and right after or in between the pandemic phase. So the role of cities, and of course the new paradigm we are trying to build and imagine after the pandemic. We discussed in many seminars about how cities will change and in which directions we need to lead them in order to make this change effective and positive. And of course, the Next Generation EU is a big try at all levels, also at the local level, to shape a new way of living, a new way of designing communities, a new way of designing our future, in a way. So we tried to analyze in the book, which I was speaking before, how the Next Generation EU is being implemented really at the local level. And of course, we're going to discuss about it in the future. But before going deep into the European case, I would like to ask Tony Paipa, according, of course, to his latest research, which role are local communities playing in the implementation of the SDGs? This is one of the key feature of his research. And of course, this is the general framework for all of us, even between the pandemic, the Sustainable Development Agenda, and of course, I mean, the challenge of localizing the agenda in every single communities. And how has the pandemic influenced this dynamic? It's a very general question, I understand, and I'm sorry for that, Tony, but I think it is interesting for us to start with this general overview before digging into the European case and, of course, our opportunities and problems connected to the big effort of the Next Generation EU. Please, Tony, you have the floor.
Thank you, Tobia, and thanks for the question. And as you mentioned, cities really are playing an important central role, I think, in leadership on sustainable development and on the sustainable development goals overall. You know, I represented the U.S. at the UN while the sustainable development goals were being negotiated. And representing a national government, we were thinking about, we recognize the importance of urbanization to sustainable development, and that's reflected in SDG 11 around sustainable, resilient, inclusive cities. But interestingly, I think what we've seen from mayors and local leaders is a recognition that their role in sustainable development goes far beyond just SDG 11. It really looks to the intersectional and interdependence of the many different issues of development, and taking on that agenda all at once. So seeking to solve multiple problems, seeking to solve problems of equity and inequality and sustainability, and take action on climate change at the same time. Now, you asked about the pandemic, and as Luigi said, the pandemic reinforced the importance of mayors and local leaders on global challenges that cut across national boundaries. We clearly saw cities and local governments forming the front lines of the response to COVID-19. And as mayors and city networks and the cooperation of cities collectively in exchanging knowledge and innovation, they've worked hard to position themselves as central to a successful recovery globally as well. And not just to recover to where things were previously to the pandemic, but to use the opportunity to accelerate progress on multiple issues at once. They see themselves as central to a transformational recovery. So in some respect, the pandemic and COVID-19 have been a proof of concept, if you will, of the importance of the Sustainable Development Goals. They're acutely aware that the well-being of their cities depends upon factors outside their city boundaries. So they're motivated to be a collective force for advancing progress on this global policy around issues, not just of public health, but around issues of equity and gender equity, around issues of progress on climate change. And they want to be protagonists, both in helping their citizens recover, but recognizing their influence and their role in helping the world recovery. And they're using the SDGs as the North Star for that recovery. And frankly, as the COVID crisis hit, we've seen the framework gain even greater value and traction and more of a central role, because it also provides a common language for cities to share amongst themselves the kind of innovations and experimentation and action that they're taking at the local level to be able to make greater progress globally.
Thank you very much, Tony, for this very, very clear introduction. I would like to ask you another issue, which is a quick one, but I think it's interesting for us because you are following this discussion and probably reading this report from a different point of view, which is, of course, the US. So basically, your point of view is interesting for us to analyze. I mean, what is your perspective of coming from another continent, another system, about our challenge of the national resilience and reconstruction plans, and how do you think, I mean, this huge effort is contributing to cities' shift towards sustainability and innovation? I understand it's quite difficult probably for you to understand from Washington, D.C., because sometimes it's also difficult for us from here, but I think if you could tell us something about that would be useful for our discussion.
Well, I think it's a huge opportunity. So financing is one of the key constraints that we hear from cities and mayors who want to be in the vanguard of making the sort of positive change I was just talking about. We see a lot of cities creating these ambitious policy goals that are in line with sustainable development, that are in line with issues of equity, and they're working hard with their own operations to get the lens of sustainability and equity into their ongoing structures and processes. They're changing budgeting processes, they're changing procurement, the kinds of relationships they have with other stakeholders in their cities, private sector, investors, universities, and they're seeing how their offices and their programs relate to each other and recognize the interdependency, but they're constrained by lack of financing available to them. And so this is a huge opportunity, I think, for member states of the EU to recognize both the incentive it provides and the space for innovation it provides at the city level and at the local government level. And I think, you know, especially coming from the US, where our local governments are pretty autonomous, I would say that getting the balance right between kind of direction from the top and trying to force everything from the top, but actually allowing for the bottom up is quite important. I think this is also an enormous opportunity to both rebuild and grow trust between citizens and their governments. And with local governments being the ones that are closest to the citizens, I think they ought to be recognized about the important role that they have to play in building the kind of resilience that it seeks to have as its outcome.
Thank you very much, Tony. Thank you very much. And let's move to the authors of this book. We decided to choose 3 women's authors of this book, and that's why also we decided to call this seminar Women's Leadership in Local Communities. And the first person and author, and of course local leader I would like to interview is Laia Bonerul. Thank you for having accepted both our invitation to write and to participate to the seminar. Thank you very much. We know you're very busy. And so my first question is about what we generally call digital innovation and new technologies, which is, of course, one of the main challenges and the main features of the Next Generation EU altogether. And of course, is your field of interest, since you are now Deputy Mayor of Barcelona, but you have been involved as a city councillor and city commissioner in this field for many years. So Barcelona has always been at the forefront in the battle for digital rights and social innovation. So basically connecting innovation both at the social level and at the technological level. So I would like to ask you, in this specific field, which are the most important challenges we will face in the near future, and how has the pandemic changed also in this field our perspective and point of view? Thank you. Laia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Luigi, Tobia, and Annalisa for the invitation. It's a pleasure to share this virtual stage with both of you, Tony and Susanna. Regarding your questions, I think there is some precision I need to make. Digital technologies are not and cannot be a goal in itself for cities. The way we in Barcelona, and also working collectively with other cities in Eurocities, are approaching digitalization is as a tool to deliver better public services and to strengthen social cohesion and the local economy. Of course, this all happens in a context of post-pandemic recovery that has left us with accelerated digitalization and has added new challenges to those we already had. So to your questions regarding the most important challenges we face, I think they can be summed up in 3 main issues. First, digital inclusion. I don't think we can afford to go on with digitalizing public services and, in fact, all sorts of aspects in our daily lives without making sure that we give people the tools to deal with digital technology. If access to education, to decent work, to public services depend on access to internet, to a laptop, and to particular skills, then we must work to make sure that these are available to everyone. And this means that we need proactive digital inclusion policies, just as we have employment policies, social services, and other basic services that are part of our welfare system. In this context, we, the cities, will need European support in building common definitions of what digital inclusion means for city governments, and especially what works and what doesn't work in order to close the digital divide. This is the one of the challenges, probably the one that is more related to the social dimension of digitalization. A second challenge is related to artificial intelligence. We are already witnessing how AI and AI systems are increasingly permeating into public services. For instance, in Barcelona, we have recommendation systems that provide social workers with proposed resources that are referred to citizens requesting support from social services. This is a very low-risk use because, of course, the final decision is made by social workers themselves, not the algorithms. However, we have seen in places like the United Kingdom and the Netherlands, AI systems causing deep social damage due to the biases reproduced. This is only the start of the inclusion of AI in public services, and we already know it can harm fundamental rights. We have a special responsibility as public institutions to regulate the use of AI in our public services to make sure that whenever an AI system is put in place, all checks and balances and all guarantees come into play to prevent discriminatory results. This is, of course, a field in which the future AI Act will determine the rules of the game. But there is a lot we can do in cities to make sure that AI is applied in a responsible and rights respectful way. And finally, a third challenge for us is, of course, governing the digital economy. We know that digital platforms were already shaping our cities before the pandemic, with short rental housing platforms, with private taxi services, with deliveries, and so on. And we know that the effects they have on rents, gentrification, local retail, and other areas of urban life are not always the best. However, we cannot deal with them as the urban phenomenon that they are, impacting on people's livelihoods, but rather we have major constraints due to the EU online commerce laws. Here again, European legislation like the Digital Services Act should make our work easier, but we will still need to work together among cities to continue learning about addressing the effects of the digital economy on urban life. So yes, to sum up, we have a lot of work to do to build a just digital transition in cities, and the European Union has a clear role to play in making it happen.
Thank you very much, Laia. And I believe this issue is absolutely crucial for our future. And I can tell all our guests, let's say digital guests in this case, so those who are actually listening to us, that her chapter is absolutely deep and full of other concepts and ideas. So it's my suggestion is to read it carefully. Thank you very much, Laia. And now I move to my mate in this adventure, both of the seminar and of this report, Annalisa Boni. By the time we were actually writing and designing this report, we were both, I was a scholar at ISPI and she was Secretary General at Eurocities. Eurocities, thank you very much, Eurocities, because it's co-hosting this seminar as well as the report. In the meanwhile, we both became city commissioner, me in Rome and she in Bologna. So now is the time. Our challenge is actually to try to to transform our ideas in this book into reality. But before coming to your direct involvement in Bologna, wonderful city, I would like to go back to our chapter, because our chapter was co-written. So we basically share not only the design of the whole project, but also the ideas of the first introductory chapter. And basically what we dealt with a few months ago, before the war in Ukraine, but still it was just a few months ago, was that European cities were quite often complaining about their scarce involvement in the designing phase of the next generation EU. And of course, I mean, the designing phase was over already 6 months ago. Now, the question was a few months ago, if things were improving in the implementation phase. This was mainly the issue of not of the whole chapter, but an important part of the chapter, also because thanks to Eurocities, we had a few surveys which were quite impressive about their, I would say, the unsatisfaction of cities in terms of involvement. So how do you see the situation from another point of view, and how has the situation changed in the recent few months after the book and the chapter was written? Please, Annalisa.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Friends and those that I don't know. It's very nice to be with you. Finally, we made it. considering all the obstacle we've had, the war, and then the change in our jobs, and then things like that. So it was really nice, and it was a really nice really coincidence, right? That we both became part of the city governments of Rome and Bologna. It was really funny. But anyway, thank you for organizing this. So yes, true, they were complaining, and I think they were complaining rightly, as usual, because it's true that when we more or less saw that in the process, because we were seeing how basically governments were trying to draft their plans. They were doing it in really fast and in an urgent, let's say, context. So it's the typical case when if you have to rush and run, you don't take the time to do proper consultation and co-creation, let's say, with stakeholders. And we never like to be seen as many other stakeholders. We like to be seen as the most important key stakeholders of member states in this case. So that's why we run two surveys. One before the plans were submitted and one after, and both they demonstrated that the majority of cities were not, let's say, satisfactorily consulted in any way, not really invited to actually co-design the plans. So I think in some countries there was a little bit more, calls to say, what do you think on this? What do you think on that? Or basically they used the national associations of local authorities just to basically tick the box. But in many cases, it was not done in the design. And at the moment, there are still I think what the surveys, the latest surveys that have been done demonstrate that, yes, there has been a little bit of an improvement, but not, let's say, enough, and not yet on the implementation. I mean, I think what I can say in the Italian case, for instance, there hasn't been a real, let's say, invitation to co-design, but okay. Anyway, the government needs us to implement, to bring to the ground all those investments, because the majority of investments are in cities. So the problem we have now in Italy is more like the fragmentation, because they didn't have the time to really coordinate at the national level all the different, let's say, areas of work and regulations and rules and reforms and investments. I mean, it's a bit for a city that has to actually, implement things. It's a bit more complicated, because we have to look at different ministers and ministries, and every ministry has a different way of working. So anyway, we are surviving, we are going through. I think the majority of cities are doing that, but it also needs to be said that apart from probably Spain and Italy and a bit France, the money to help recovery in countries that comes from the EU, from the Next Generation, is big in those countries, but it's much less big in countries like Finland, I'm talking about Susanna, or Sweden, or even Germany, and so on. So if you think of Germany, I can't remember, but 100. It was like the part of the recovery plan was really like a small percentage. So of course, maybe countries, when they had such small envelopes, they didn't bother too much to do that. But this is not the issue. It's more a matter of governance, and now at the moment is really to make sure that the interlocution with the governments is there to understand what to do with the leftovers. So what what to do with the money that has not been requested by the potential beneficiaries. This is a big discussion issue, and also other problems that are related to the implementation of projects that require, for instance, more costs than foreseen because of the energy crisis and other things. So I think that the sort of interlocution, the exchange with the government, if it's not done in a structured way, it happens anyway because there are urgent things to solve. So there are problems that can only be solved together and also by talking with cities. So yeah, I think there will be more surveys, I guess, from Eurocities, but at the moment, I think that's the context.
Thank you very much, Annalisa, and I will go back to you in order to know more about your experience in Bologna, also because among your responsibilities, you have a direct responsibility on the National Resilience and Recovery Plan. But now I would like to move to Susanna Tomila, and thank you very much for being here from Finland. And as Annalisa Boni said, and actually Finland is quite present in the news in these days, but this is something which is not about our discussion. And basically your prime minister was in Rome just yesterday, so it's quite actual in every sense, but we're going to speak about something else. And we are speaking about your very, very interesting chapter where you speak about the relationship between cities, culture, and public spaces, I would say. This is the main issue. And of course, we know that the pandemic of COVID-19 had a huge, deep, disruptive impact on cities' cultural life and people's lifestyle. This is, I think, the main issue. So I would like to know from your point of view in ESPO and in general about your point of view in the working groups among Eurocities and other networks. First of all, which is the situation today in this field, in this respect, and what do we need to update concerning our habits and perspectives in the light of the past 2 years? Please, Susanna, you have the floor. And of course, I would like to thank also Stephen Hoffman, who was the co-author of Susanna's chapter, coming from Dresden. So he's not here because, as we decided, we are talking about women's leadership. But thank you, Stephanie, if you're listening to us. Please, Susanna, you have the floor.
Thank you. And first of all, I feel very privileged that I have been writing it together with Stefan, this article to the publication. And it was an interesting journey, and actually it showed how fast the world is changing, because during writing it, everything was all the time changing because of the pandemic situation. And now actually it has changed a lot since that. So I would probably write it a little bit different now when I know about the unfortunate situation with Ukraine and everything that is happening. But yes, the pandemic had a deep impact really on both cities, city organizations, and also on citizens. And it will take time to recover. We need perspective. We need time to see what kind of impact it really has had. What we can see now is that the audiences, the people's behavior, people are not coming back to among the cultural life and to the cultural events in the same way as we actually were expected them to do. And there is a really significant change in that kind of behavior. At least in Finland, we have a lot of dropouts, both hobby dropouts among young people, but also elderly people who doesn't come back to concerts and theaters, and probably won't even come. So I really think that there is a lot to do with that. And at the same time, with the new situation in Europe, I think culture could have a big role in telling and showing people that it is important to come together, and it is important to be and safe to be together also. So that is something that I think we should work on in the future. Another thing that I think we should focus on, and that I'm not sure what it really means yet, is is the values. We need to focus on if the values have reshaped somehow because of all these changes around us. First of all, people probably are thinking, are we allowed to have fun? Are we allowed to travel? Are we allowed to go to different cultural events and so on? But mostly the consumption, the increased understanding of consumption, I think it has even increased now during the pandemic time and because of the crisis we have. And also, of course, the value-based choices within the citizens. So they are more knowing of what they will do or what they want to do. But these are all just speculations. So I'm sure we need some time and to see a perspective to see what the real changes are in the cities.
Thank you very much, Susanna. I would like to go back a little bit to your point. I mean, in your chapter and also in this short address you made, I think we are speaking about the relationship between culture, public spaces, inequalities, and loneliness in a way, which are all features of the pandemic phase, but also about our challenges within the framework of cities and local communities and changing societies. So in this respect, not culture just as having fun, but culture as a matter of equality, as a matter of social innovation, social involvement. Do you think that European programs and funding programs are working well, are changing in a way our cities programs and are kind of making difference also in this respect, or not yet, let's say? The mic?
Yeah. Yes. I would say that, well, as we see could you please ask the question again? Because I thought you were talking about culture and I was trying to answer that.
Yeah. The question is about culture and its implications, its influence on social inequalities in a way.
Yes.
So this is one of the main key issue, in my opinion, after the pandemic. And I was wondering whether, I mean, from your point of view as cultural director, I mean, the programs of the European Union are going in the right directions or still need to be reshaped, this perspective?
Thank you. Yes. Well, definitely, I think they are going to the right direction, of course. But the local, I believe that the cities have a very big role in that. The local actors and the local professionals knows best what kind of changes and what kind of needs the citizens have. And that's why the discussion and the dialogue between Europe and the cities is very important, and the dialogue between different cities also, to know what kind of help is needed, what kind of peer learning is needed, and what kind of support from the European Commission is needed. And definitely, as we all know, many, when we are talking about cultural spaces or third spaces, we talk about libraries, we talk about museums, we talk about places where people can meet each other, people can equally face different things, difficult things to discuss about, and they are all organized in a different way in cities. So it's important to have the dialogue both between the cities and between the cities and the European organizations. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Susanna. And now I'm going back to Annalisa in her responsibility, in her capacity of city commissioner. And since you are dealing directly with the challenge of spending these huge resources of the National Resilience and Recovery Plan,
No pressure.
I would like to ask you, which are the, let's say, the key actions you need to implement in order to take advantage of this huge opportunity, as Tony said before, but then also huge problems. And then maybe if we have a few minutes, I will tell you my personal experience about my personal feeling about that.
Yeah. Okay. So the first action to do is to appoint a deputy mayor dedicated to the recovery funds and the EU funds that has experience in this. No, I'm joking, but still. No, I think the key actions. So first of all, I would say the RRF funds are one of the funds. Yeah. So what really is important, there are funds at the European level, so structure funds. Now, of course, the next generation and the RRF are, extraordinary funds, but there are, anyway, other funds like structure funds, national funds, regional funds, local funds, and so on. So what is important to have is to have an overall sort of mapping picture of all the cities' priorities and projects, key projects, and on that basis ensure that as much as possible, because it's not that easy, you try and allocate the right funds to the right projects. Yeah, because it's true that the RFF is a bit, how do you say, rigid. As we've said, it wasn't a co-design, so people just basically, we have seen calls coming down on our heads that we had to respond to and had to prepare. But it was important to be able to say, okay, this doesn't fit in this. We could do it in the structure funds. We will be able to do it in the structure funds, or we will ask the national level to do it later on this, and so on. So because the RFF, for instance, has very strong requirements on timings, so 2026, which is not an easy thing for some type of interventions. And also it's got lots of heavy requirements like, the do not harm to the environment, or other sort of principles that are quite, that make the whole process quite strict, and that the municipalities still don't know. So it's important to have this overall map, let's say, of projects and interventions. And then second, and you need to have an organized structure, competent as much as possible, that is able to muddle through the jungle of the RFF in particular, because it's new, and help the sectors to translate those calls into the projects that they have. So to match the two things and help them to be able to and get ready for the technical requirements and do the right calls themselves to organize the building sites and all these kind of things. So the competence and capacity to develop on one side, but on the other side, really to face the sort of administrative and organized part of the funds. And then I would say a sort of governance with the city, with the ecosystem of the cities, with the partnership, to make sure that you share projects, your own projects as city, but also to understand what others do. And share the concerns and the issues in the implementations. I'm just thinking what I said before, all the problems we will have in terms of, capacity of building sites to actually open because of lack of raw materials or of labor, or, increase of costs, how we're going to do that. So having a regular exchange with, for instance, the association of constructors or the builders, or working with the social third sector to understand, what are their issues in terms of implementing the projects that are in the RFF, and things like that. The cooperatives, everyone. It makes the whole effort positive in terms of making sure we get to the end. And finally, in our own specific case, we really made a choice to work at the metropolitan level and not only at the city level, and ensure that for us the allocations and the projects and the mapping, for instance, of projects as well, and everything that will come from the RFF will be for the metropolitan city, meaning that the RFF cannot create or cannot exacerbate the territorial inequalities, but actually it has to help fighting them. So we need to reinforce the capital, but we also need to reinforce the rest of the metro city region territory.
Thank you very much, Annalisa. Very clear, and I will say a few words after that. But before giving my personal experience and point of view, I'd like to listen to Laia, and the same question. I mean, how do you think we should actually act in order to make this big opportunity as much as effective as possible and also going in the right direction?
Well, I think we have two differentiated things here, or we have to differentiate two things. First, has the next generation EU set the right priorities for the future of Europe and its communities? And I think the answer is yes. I definitely think so. Decarbonizing our economy, ensuring a just digital transition that boosts both our competitiveness and social opportunities, and doing so by strengthening our social net systems. Yes, I think those are transformative goals. The second question here, though, is whether the way to do it is right, whether the extent to which communities are involved in this transformation is what we need. And on that, I must say that the EU and national governments did not get it right. Italy is, as Annalisa has pointed out, one of the few governments that has allocated a small share of the recovery funds for cities to manage directly. It is not the case of Spain, for instance, where all our next generation funds come through competitive calls through either the national or the regional governments. Calls, by the way, in which we cities compete not only against other cities, but also against private companies, universities, and many other stakeholders. Anyway, the direct control of a share of the recovery funds is something that we, with Eurocities and other European capitals, demanded back in 2020 when the recovery package was being negotiated. In fact, the European Parliament supported an amendment of the regulation that allocated 10% of the recovery funds allocated nationally to be managed by local governments. Of course, they didn't make it through negotiations with the Council. And this harms the transformative goals of the funds. For instance, how is the money going to make a true difference for people living in a badly isolated all apartments in the city outskirts? What we would need here is money that supports energy retrofitting for those residents, while also taking into account issues such as accessibility or other urban services. However, how is this going to happen if local governments who have a direct knowledge of what the needs are and where they are not involved in the decision making? What I'm trying to say here is that without cities having a decision in where this money needs to be channeled to, we cannot speak of communities being involved in the next generation EU at all. I think it is perhaps the biggest pitfall of resilience and recovery funds. But this is not new, I'm afraid. It reproduces a logic within the EU institutions in which member states make decisions that are up to us, cities, to implement. We are treated as just another stakeholders in Brussels, rather than as democratically elected institutions that are on the front line of European challenges. And we cannot go on with business as usual if we are to turn Next Generation EU into a tool that builds a greener and fairer future for communities who need it the most. So this would be my answer.
Thank you very much, Laia. Very clear. I will very, very briefly tell you my answer, although I'm asking the question as well. I think that the Next Generation EU at the local level has a few very, very important answers and approaches, and you both mentioned them, but I think it's important to underline them. The first one is that we are forced to design cross-cutting projects, which is something that not usually happens in cities. Instead, in this case, we have very, very big calls where we need to put together departments and experts and administrators in different fields, and this is something very important. The second important thing is that, as Annalisa said, we are forced to design at the metropolitan level, because the main part of the funds are not going directly to the cities themselves, but they are going to the, what we call in Italy, the metropolitan cities, but in any case, let's say to the regional level, which is good, because of course we need to create links, as I said before, and not to create divisions. I believe instead that the problems are connected to the process, not just in terms of the involvement towards national level and towards European level, but really in the administration of the funds. So first of all, we have very, very short notice and very, very short terms for these calls that Laia was talking about, which means that all the structure, the administrative structure, is always running toward these calls, and actually it is not prepared for such an effort, which means we don't have the time to, to shape and create, a process and a project which is, thought during the time. It's really a run, to get the fund and then, let's say, hope that we will actually manage them in the best way. The second problem, in my opinion, is that this pressure and this short time, it creates a big problem in terms of participation of citizens. Sometimes we have situations in which we present very, very good projects towards a territory, towards an outskirts, towards a suburb or whatever it is, and then we are actually blamed by the inhabitants or the citizens because they were not involved in that project, in that design, and really we didn't have time to, involve them and to present them the idea and of course discuss them with it. But at the end of the day, I mean, they were right, because that is their home and not just, that one of the administration. And finally, I believe that there is a big issue of the structure itself. We have to implement all the projects. We have a few years, like 2 or 3 years, and not only a problem of the public administration, but also of the economic textures, which needs to be ready to absorb all these billions of euros. And these are huge challenges, in my opinion. And I believe that probably in the next months or years, a big discussion will be how to, in a way, postpone or pull a little bit the terms in order to make many projects really become effective and not just ideas. But maybe I'm pessimist. I'm negative in this respect, and probably things will go better. So we're almost out of time, but I would like to conclude with Tony Paipa. You overviewed the whole discussion from the US, and I would like to conclude with a very, very short and maybe too simple question for yourself, but I think this is something interesting also in your work at the, let's say, international level with cities and local communities. And the question is, do you really think, out of rhetoric, that women's leadership can represent a specific opportunity for all what we heard, but also all what you follow in your job, for local communities in these difficult times after the pandemic and unfortunately within this war time?
Well, we've we've heard the perspectives of women leaders on this particular workshop, and I think you see the perceptiveness of issues. Look, the interdependencies of the issues that we're talking about here today really requires, I think, a recognition that equity is at the heart of a thriving local community. Women as leaders tend to bring a focus on those issues. And I think it's very important, even from the perspective of sustainable development, that we look at equity in all its forms and gender equity, and not just the inequality of leadership, but equity within the economy itself as well. And we're seeing very interesting ways in which cities across the world are recognizing, for example, the role that women play in the care economy and the constraints that means, both for those women as a group, but also for their economy locally as well. You see things like Bogota creating spaces where care can be provided that then in blocks, they're creating these care blocks like an innovation that then frees up women to be able to pursue their own professional development and their own entrepreneurial impulses and be a larger part of driving the economy forward in many different respects. I think we're going to see a lot of innovation and experimentation around that. And I think a lot of that is going to be sort of grassroots at the very local community level. And I think marrying that type of innovation within the economy and within the culture of cities with leadership, political leadership and administrative leadership at the top of cities really will position cities to continue to thrive and go forward and kind of deal with the kinds of different issues that we've been talking about today coming out of the pandemic and leading into a recovery and a more equitable recovery overall. Really appreciated this conversation, and thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Tony. And I believe you answered in a very, very correct perception and perspective. I think we are out of time. We were punctual, I must say, so this is good, but we don't have time to get, let's say, questions from the public. There were a few, but I think we are almost late. So thank you very much. Thank you all. Starting from Luigi Boré, our partner in the program of Global Cities with Euro Milano, and then Tony Paipa, Annalisa Boni, Laia Bonet, and Susanna Tomilla. Thank you. Thank to Eurocities. Thank you, ISPI, for organizing this event. And of course,
thanks to you.
I would say stay tuned, because we need to keep on the conversation following the whole process. So let's say that we will gather again somewhere to discuss about the follow-ups. And really thank you very much all, and have a nice evening or morning, depending on the jet lag. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.